All right, welcome everyone. I'm Janet Barlow and I'm the Executive Director of Hike Nova Scotia, and welcome to our Accessible Trails Case Studies and Design webinar. This is part of the Trail Sector Capacity Building Project through Hike Nova Scotia's Trail Builders Network, and it is supported by the Nova Scotia Department of Communities, Culture, Tourism, and Heritage. So the Trail Builders Network is our capacity building hub for trail groups, First Nations, and municipalities that build and maintain hiking trails. We represent the largest group of trail users on the trails, and we also represent trail building groups. Hike NS was approached by CCTH to spearhead this project because they see, as we've seen as well, that many trail group boards are struggling to keep their organizations afloat. Volunteers are hard to find. They're aging out, and for folks who just want to build and maintain trail, making their trails accessible can be a challenging and daunting task to face, along with everything else that they face. So we hope this webinar series will help, and it's for any and all groups in the trail sector. And this particular webinar is the first of two specifically on accessible trails. We also held one back in the fall as more of an introduction. And I do want to acknowledge that we are in Mi'kma'ki, which is the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. And the Mi'kmaq were the first hikers and in this province. And there are trails here that are literally thousands of years old. And just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. So it'll be about an hour and a half long. We'll maybe keep your videos turned off and your mics muted during the presentation. And then we'll open it up to questions later on. And at that time, you can turn your videos on. You can unmute and ask questions. Or if you feel more comfortable, you can also ask questions in the chat. But again, we'll address those more towards the end. If you have any technical problems, there is the troubleshooting link in your confirmation email, and you can also try calling in because there's a call-in option as well. And just again, before we get started, I'll just tell you really quickly about Hike Nova Scotia. So we are a provincial nonprofit, and we're just trying to build a culture of hiking in the province. We strive to be the voice for those who hike, walk, and snowshoe, as well as those who build and maintain hiking trails. We're about hiking promotion, education, and just encouraging people to get out onto the trails, and we do that in a number of ways. We have our seasonal guided hike and walk series, our NS Walks walking group program. We have our hiking summit annual conference coming up in May, end of May, early June, and that's in Bridgewater. And we have a number of skill building in-person courses as well as webinars. We promote the International Appalachian Trail in the province. We have our Hiker Challenge where you can earn badges. We have our Young Hikers Club, as well as the Trail Builders Network. So we are member-based, and paid members get lots of perks and discounts. And we have a website and social media that are great resources for hiking and trail information and events. And as part of this larger series of webinars, we held our first one back on March 24th. That recording is actually up on our website right now. We already held the second webinar, the Stronger Boards 2. That is about to go up on our website probably by the end of this week. And then we have another Stronger Boards webinar coming up. Of course, we have the two Accessible Trails webinars. And then later in May, we've got mental health and trails and volunteer recruitment and retention. So registration is open and free for all of those. And again, there will be recordings of those as well if you happen to miss any of them. And just as a heads up, more information is coming soon on this. We are going to have two summer trail support coordinators available where maybe 8 to 10 trail groups will apply, and we'll be able to give them some support over the summer just to improve communications, help with recruiting volunteers, help with developing any governance documents and things like that, as well as helping with organizing some trail maintenance events. So that will be available over the summer, but more is to come on that. So that is all I have. Now for the good stuff. Why you're here. So I will stop sharing. So the reason you're here is to hear Chloe. So Chloe McDonald is our speaker tonight, and with a passion for recreation and inclusion, Chloe has found her niche working as a recreational therapist and accessibility professional. Um, she is a certified therapeutic recreation specialist and uses recreation, leisure, and play as treatment modalities to support purposeful and meaningful interventions that are based on individual strengths and values. Chloe is a designated professional with the Rick Hansen Foundation and owner of Accessibuild. So she provides accessibility education, consultation, and assessment of the built environment in all the places we live, work, learn, and play, and heal. She believes that accessible recreation is not only a human right, but something that contributes significantly to the health and prosperity of communities. Her goal is to be a driving force in building capacity and support, creating communities where everyone can thrive. Chloe delivered our first Accessible Trails webinar back in September, which was quite popular and well received. Again, there is a recording of that intro webinar on our website. And so that's Chloe. But before we dive in, maybe what we could do is do a really quick round of introductions of folks who are on the webinar. And so I'll ream through according to who's on my screen, and maybe you can just say your name and what organization you're with, and just generally where in the province you are. Just really quick. Okay, so you're gonna have to unmute. So first on my screen is Charlene.
Hi, it's Charlene Porter in Guysborough County. I'm with the St. Mary's Trails Association, and we are developing trail on the former Guysborough Railway.
Great, thanks. And Joanna.
Hi, everybody. My name is Joanna McIntyre. I'm with the Nine-Mile River Trails Association, and our trails are located just north of the Halifax Stanfield International Airport in the Enfield and Nine-Mile River area.
Great, thanks. And Claire.
I guess that would be me. My name is actually Tanya Bouchard. I'm with the Shubenacadie Canal Commission, and my name comes up as Claire because I took over from her in late May of last year. But obviously, when I accept invites, it's still coming up as her. So happy to be here.
Okay, great. Yeah, glad to have you here too. Darlene.
Hello, everyone. It's Darlene and Paul Proctor, and we have the Cape George hiking trails in Antigonish County, and our trail system is about 27 years old, so lots of maintenance.
Right on. And Doug and Nicole.
Hi, Doug Leone.
And Nicole Cammert.
And we're from Cox Heath Wilderness Recreation Association, just outside of Sydney in Cape Breton.
Great, welcome. Thanks for being here. And I have Jeremy.
Jeremy Cromwell, safety coordinator for the Snowmobilers Association in Nova Scotia, and I help support the clubs, the 21 snowmobile clubs across the province, and I live in Windsor, Nova Scotia.
Great, welcome. And Joanna, oh, we already had Joanna. Melissa, it's hard to, people's names keep bouncing around on my screen.
Hi, I'm Melissa Trenham. I'm on the board of directors for Greater Dorchester Moving Forward, and also the chair of our trails committee, and we develop local trails in our area. Yes, we are in New Brunswick, but just on the other side of the border from Nova Scotia, and close, we're neighbors, so.
We're happy to have you. Thanks for joining. And Michelle.
Hi, Kate Breton, Regional Physical Activity Consultant.
Okay.
And I sit on the Hike Nova Scotia board.
Yes. And Natalie?
Hi, I'm Natalie Donchema. I'm the Recreation Director for the Municipality of Argyll in Southwest Nova Scotia, and I support the trails development associations throughout our municipality, as well as the accessible lead in our municipality.
Great. And Yvette.
Hi, I'm Yvette Rogers. I work for the municipality of Victoria County. I'm the community development coordinator, so trails will be one of the portfolios that I have, and I'm also the accessibility lead for the county.
Okay. Well, welcome everyone. Did I miss anyone? I don't think I did, but I may have. As I said, the names keep bouncing around on my screen. Great. Well, thanks everyone. So yeah, I will hand it over to Chloe and on we go with the good stuff. I'll just turn my video off so you can focus on the presentation.
All right. Can everyone see that all right?
It's yes.
All right. Thanks everybody for being here and for taking the time to introduce yourselves. The last time we did a webinar, we had a lot of information to get through. It was a larger group. This time it's great that it's a smaller group. We can kind of have some more open dialogue. I am happy to answer questions if you have questions as we go through the presentation. As Janet said, I'm Chloe McDonald. I'm from Mahone Bay originally, and I'm actually living in Sydney River, Cape Breton now. Recently left my job as a recreation therapist, but working in primary health care now as a health services lead. So still very much carry that passion for recreation and inclusion and accessibility with me in a new environment. I just out of curiosity before we begin, did anyone attend the first session of accessibility introduction? Okay.
I'm not seeing
that's actually it's great because we are going to start with a brief review of all the different components of accessibility. So kind of just introduce myself. I am a person without a disability. My accessibility journey actually started when I became pregnant with my son, and I was really struggling to get in and out of different environments with a stroller. It was a privilege that was my first experience with it, and it really hit home for me how even as someone without a disability that I was struggling to navigate in the built environment. So ended up taking the Rick Hansen Foundation course and then starting Accessibuild. But I do think it's important to recognize the significant contribution that people with lived experience play in this and how important they are to include in these design and development sessions and work. So the goals of the webinar, we're going to review some standards. We're going to go through the different types of standards, and the standards I'm going to focus on really are the Rick Hansen Foundation, and we'll find out in just a minute why they're kind of the gold standard for accessibility. We're going to talk a little bit about accessible trails versus accessible features. We're going to go over a moon mist case study from the County of Annapolis. And then we're going to talk a little bit about assessment and how you can actually be doing some of this assessment yourselves. I'm just going to move my screen around a little bit here. Okay, so the different standards. Nova Scotia Building Code is one that most people are familiar with. It's when you engage a contractor or builder, that's what they're going to follow because that's what they're legally required to follow. We do know that Nova Scotia Building Code is the minimum. So as it kind of indicates under purpose, it's the provincial legal requirements for construction, including minimum accessibility standards. So what we know is that the building code is the minimum. It's not usually what is truly meaningfully accessible for folks. The improvements in this code, though, are that it now references the CSA B651 for guidance in the accessibility components. So the CSA B651 is the standard guide for all things accessibility. So it addresses things like physical and sensory barriers. It provides detailed design specifications, so tactile attention indicators, door widths, luminance, contrast, etc. Using the CSA is voluntary, and I do respect that it's a little bit confusing to be, working with builders and saying I want things accessible, but them maybe not fully understanding the level of accessibility you're looking for, based on these two different standards. The next up is the Rick Hansen Foundation. It's a voluntary certification program that accesses meaningful access beyond code compliance. So the Rick Hansen Foundation also uses the CSA B651 guidelines, but the difference is that they've involved people with lived experience to really develop standards with specific criteria that go, again, above and beyond the baseline access. So in sum, building code is the legal minimums. The CSA B651 is the technical blueprint for accessibility, and the Rick Hansen Foundation is the voluntary excellence benchmark. So what we're going to start with going through today is the Rick Hansen Foundation standards. So we will go through this relatively quickly to allow for more dialogue. But what I really want to highlight with these things is that accessibility isn't just the trail. Accessibility starts in the parking lot. If someone can't get from the parking lot to the trail, it doesn't matter that the trail is accessible. So it does very thoroughly go over all of those different things. For trails specifically, they talk about designated trailheads, trail and pathway entrances, clear width and passing spaces, surface resistance, slopes, obstacles, edge protection, seating, drainage, ramps, stairs, and more. So we'll go through these and see kind of how they're relevant for hiking. So the designated trailheads is really about when people enter the parking lot, are they going to understand where the entrance of the trail is? Where does the trail begin? Where is that main source of information that tells someone, which trail is accessible? How long are the trails? What to look out for on the trail? And especially decision points. So having information available on which trail specifically is accessible, or if the whole trail is accessible, allows people to make the decision that's best for them and their abilities. Entrances. So a lot of times people have things like rocks or bollards present at the entrances to at times keep mobile devices, vehicles off the trail. But sometimes we forget that also means, wheelchairs and different also can't navigate past. So our goal is that anything that's kind of blocking the trail or reducing access to the trail leaves a clear width minimum of 860 millimeters. Sometimes folks have gates. They really need to be simple and easy to open. For width and passing, so you want to provide sufficient clear width, ideally to allow the one or two-way flow of people depending on the expected number of people. Sometimes, a lot of times our goal is for people to be able to independently navigate these environments. However, we recognize too that sometimes people come with support animals, sometimes people come with support people. And we want folks to be able to pass each other easily without having to either turn around or back up. Stable surface. So this is one that we talk a little bit about, and I will just say I can't see if anyone has their hand up. So if you do have a question, please feel free to just take yourself off mute and jump in. Stable surfacing is one of the most important things. And with trails, it's interesting because we do understand that you're in the natural environment. That is often why people seek hiking as their leisure activity of choice. So we don't expect folks to just pave through their trail. But just for the information, paved and concrete is the most firm and movement resistant. But then there's other types of surfacing material. So having crusher dust, crushed pea gravel, that is what we're seeing for a lot of accessible trails. And that's not to say too that, you know, the natural dirt might be quite compact and able to be maneuvered around. It just requires more maintenance. So if there is things like wood, making sure there's minimal gaps, joints, or breaks in the surface to prevent any tripping hazards. Excuse me. And any gaps should run perpendicular to the direction of movement so folks don't get their wheels caught in, for an example. Level path. So this is another one that really is a challenge at times for trails to kind of meet for an accessibility criteria. It has to have a running slope of less than, I believe, 8%. And handrails, if a sloped pathway has a running slope of over that, where a ramp cannot be installed due to the topography of the trail. So measuring slopes, we're going to talk more about this near the end of the presentation. It may just be an area where you have identified that up until this point of the trail is accessible, and beyond this point of the trail, you may require assistance. So you may require someone to support your wheelchair as you continue through. And it comes back to being able to have folks make those decisions for themselves and to have all the information to go forward or turn back. Path and overhead obstacles. So we need to make sure that, you know, in the natural world, there can be overhang, branches breaking, different things. This kind of comes back to maintenance in that we're making sure there's not overhead obstacles, especially for folks who may have low vision or vision loss. It becomes difficult to navigate if you're trying to use a cane to detect what's on the ground, and you can't use that cane to detect what's coming towards your head. So making sure that any fixed items are located off the path of travel. The next is edge protection. So you know, we use the examples with wheelchairs quite a bit. And obviously we don't want anyone to go off an edge of something. Clearly defined edge or edge protection also helps folks with sight loss or vision or reduced vision. So having curbs, barriers, or guardrails on either side of a trail, or having it, if there's not a change in slope, just having it be color contrast, so you can identify where the trail is versus where it's not. Yeah. Pedestrian crossings. So if the trail happens to go through across a lane of traffic, for example, to another side of the road, making sure that it's identified for pedestrian crossing, but also having attention indicators and signage, so folks know to slow down or be cautious of where they're about to walk or roll. Seating, so providing seating off the path of travel at rest areas, especially if the routes are longer. Ideally, the seating is located on firm, stable surface, contrasts visually with surroundings. incorporates clear space for folks using wheelchairs, scooters, or strollers so they can sit alongside one another, and offers a variety of seating options. So having some with and without armrests. Drainage. This again comes a little bit back to trail maintenance, but also, you know, post-storm, things like that. Ideally, the trail doesn't permit water accumulation or pooling, ensures that drainage channels do not obstruct the path of travel, has drainage grates offset with the main pathway, ensures opening for drainage gates are perpendicular to the path of travel. Well illuminated, so this doesn't mean that you have to install lights on your trail. A lot of folks typically use trails in the daytime, but ensures the complete trail pathway is brightly lit. We really don't want, in the daytime anyway, too many shadowed areas. If an area looks dark to someone who has low vision or vision loss, they may assume that it's kind of a drop-off area, whereas it may just be a shadow on the ground. So providing adequate lighting for the nature and use of the trail, provides even light distribution at the ground level, and has any fixtures mounted below eye level, in addition to standard lighting to provide better definition of ground surfaces. Ramps. So our ramps have a running slope of less than 8.3%, ideally 5% or less, provides sufficient clear width, free from obstructions, allows people to pass one another. The surface is firm, stable, and slip resistant, and landings are located on the top and bottom of each run. Handrails. So this is again one of those things that would be an accessible feature. So providing handrails on both sides of a ramp at consistent accessible heights. People who are blind or have low vision rely on handrails to guide them in negotiating ramps. People with mobility rely on them for stability. So again, ensuring that they're securely attached. Lots of folks use different materials for handrails. We do recommend wood or plastic coated steel, as when you're outside, it can become too hot with the sun, potentially burn folks. And edge protection. So especially if there's a drop off or a cliff or a viewpoint, making sure that there's protective barriers on both sides of ramps and landings, etc. So that's kind of the Rick Hansen Foundation guide for trails specifically. They don't do any rating of trails. Typically the ratings and certifications are reserved for commercial and multi-unit residential buildings. But they do provide kind of best practices for trails. When it comes to the CSA B651, they do use very similar guidelines. So they go over ground surfaces, edge protection, clear width and passing, surface resistant, path slope, obstacles and overhead, and edge protection. Does anyone have any questions so far? I lost everybody.
Chloe, I just want to point out too, in our first webinar that was back in September, sort of contextualizing disability, and all of that was kind of covered in that webinar. But if folks have any questions about the types of disability we're talking about here, then we can talk about that later as well. But just to keep that in your heads, that there's the physical, which a lot of us kind of immediately kind of go to, but then there's all the other types, because there are invisible disabilities as well. Just want to point that out.
Absolutely. And it's a great reminder as well, because that's something that we find building code specifically really focuses on the physical. And that's again kind of where the Rick Hansen Foundation differs, is that they've considered kind of all the different disabilities. I think with one of their newer categories have been doing more on sensory friendly environments, recognizing that that was kind of even a gap from the first time they had put the standards together. So everything is always improving, and certainly I think the most important is that disability is such a unique experience. Oh, thank you, Yvette. So sorry, go ahead.
I have a question, Chloe, around the seating.
Sure.
Is there a minimum or a maximum distance between the seating areas?
They recommend every 50 meters. We know that that's not always attainable for folks, and it's certainly not a like you have to have it every 50 meters or not. But that's the recommendation is every 50 meters, there's either a rest area where you can kind of pull off the path or a seat that you could kind of rest on.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm glad I looked that up. So I know folks had some specific questions around sight and sight loss. So some different visual features that you can incorporate. So obviously edge protection and navigation are some of the most important. Attention indicators for areas to proceed with caution. So cliffs, water crossings, steep slopes. You can have auditory and sensory support. So perhaps at the main entrance, you might have some, really smelly flour. So they can kind of, the olfactory senses kind of kick in and they know that they're close to the entrance. You can also have some QR codes, and these, I know we don't really want to be, we want to keep the environment as natural as possible. But you can have QR codes on your signage. You can also have QR codes posted throughout the park. So if you do have, a small brook, maybe you have a QR code that's stationed on a post, and it kind of gives an overview of, this is what this scene kind of looks like. Or if there's, any look-offs, things like that. Certainly recognizing that a lot of trails struggle financially there's not all the money in the world to be incorporating all these new technologies and things like Braille on guardrails and things like that, but there's certainly a lot of different ways that you can incorporate enhanced experience for folks with vision loss and reduced vision. So cognitive features. So decision making is the most important, especially for someone who may have dementia or get confused, or just requires things to be more easily navigatable, if that's a word. Having navigation be clear and simple. So for example, the trail is a loop or an in and out. There aren't too many decision points along the trail where someone could kind of get stuck. Adequate signage with distance markers. So, I know the trail is 5 kilometers and I only just passed kilometer 2 and I'm already exhausted. I think I'm going to turn around now. Navigational cues again, such as, having things clear. Where is the entrance? Where is the exit? How do I know when I've reached my destination? So this is a case study that I'm hoping to review. So this is the Moon Mist All Ability Accessible Trail. It's in the county of Annapolis. So it's a new trail that is fully accessible. It's a 550 meter looped path. It's even graded 5 feet wide pathway. They've got wooden sides along the perimeter. The siding along the perimeter they've shared has been served kind of dual purposes. So it's provided that guidance for folks with sight loss, but it's also helped to maintain the gravel and reduce the damage from washout. They've got a trail kiosk, some picnic areas and rest stops, 3 accessible parking spaces. They've got an accessible porta potty near the start of the trail. And they worked together. The County of Annapolis worked with the volunteer group, the Annapolis Basin Outdoor Adventure Society. So just to go through a few of their photos that they've shared, you can see that, you know, the picnic tables that they've selected have the extended table edges. Even in the surfacing, you can see that it's the finely crushed gravel. You can see the edge where the trails kind of ends very clearly. You can, if you zoom in a little bit, you can kind of see how there's a very clear exterior to the trail to show where the end is, whether that's through a rock or through the 2x4 wood. This is one of the signs they have. So you can see it shows you which trail is the All Ability Trail. It's got icons to tell you that the parking is accessible, that there's a kiosk map, there's rest stops, rest areas, and viewpoints. Shows you where they are along the trail. And I didn't actually get a chance to scan the QR code to see what it says, but I am looking forward to doing that. They also have sheltered signage that gives more information on the other trails in the area, rules and guidelines for the trail, etc. And this is kind of the parking spaces. So again, when folks are coming to hike and have a disability, they're not expecting, you know, they're expecting the natural world. So having things advertised in a way that folks, again, can make the decision that's best for them. So if they know the parking lot is gravel, they, you know, they can come better prepared for that. But again, it doesn't mean that you have to have paved parking lots and those things. Maintenance, which I know is kind of one of the main struggles, is really the key with these types of trails. So this gives another really good example of the edge protection and the clear edges, the natural light for the trail. This is one of their picnic areas. So you can see that it's off the main trail and there's lots of room to maneuver around the picnic tables themselves. They also have, this is located just to the left is actually the entrance of the trail. So they do have this at the beginning of the trail. And if we go back, they show that they have some picnic tables kind of throughout the trail as well. So in terms of the trails that you're working with, when it's time to figure out, you know, what's our plan going to be for accessibility? So is it realistic that your trail can be fully accessible? Does it have the width? Does it have only an 8% grade slope? Otherwise, you can enhance the accessibility of your trail. It just wouldn't meet criteria to be a fully accessible trail. And again, this is something a lot of folks use different means to communicate with the users of their trails. So whether that's through, you know, Trails NS, whether it's through a local Facebook page in the community, having something pinned or readily viewable that allows people to decide whether or not this is the trail for them. And oftentimes there's a way to make a portion of your trail accessible, even if it all can't be fully accessible. So the assessment toolkit, certainly, you know, engaging with folks with lived experience in your community, In one of the next slides, we have a few organizations locally that work with individuals with disabilities. Is one of your best bets for real assessment of your trail. Certainly, there's also other Rick Hansen Foundation certified folks throughout the province. Whether they would charge to do that assessment or not, I'm not sure. But I would say that you can very easily assess whether you're looking at a fully accessible trail or not, using these three things. So the measuring tape, so you can measure the width of parking spaces if applicable, the width of pathways, edges, height of overhang. This other device, the orange Klein, it measures the slope for you. So you simply put it on the ground and it'll tell you the percent of the grade. It's about $45 at Home Depot. I'm sure there's probably one cheaper on Amazon, or somewhere else local. And with information from the CSA, we've put together this trail accessibility checklist. I know that folks have been really eager to work on the accessible components of their trails, but feel that they don't really have the tools to do that. So we've put together this kind of baseline checklist for the main priorities for accessibility. And that's something that I'm going to send to Janet that can be distributed. Again, there's definitely more thorough assessments and considerations, but it's a good baseline for working towards some priorities. So some local supports, so Easter Seals, Reachability, Inclusion Nova Scotia, L'Arche Halifax, there's L'Arche Cape Breton as well, the Club Inclusion, and of course the Rick Hansen Foundation. A lot of the Rick Hansen Foundation's materials are copywritten, but they have a wealth of free resources, and blog posts, things like that. They're also excellent if you email with a question, to get back to you with good information. So kind of where we're at now would be, this is kind of where I'd like to open the floor a little bit, to what are you hoping to do now? So a lot of times we look, start at the beginning, start where you start on your trail. So, can people get from the parking lot to the trail? Can people get through any type of entry point? Is there solid signage and information that people can use to make decisions for themselves about the trail? Then you're into the trail. So is there a portion of the trail that can be, maybe widened, or, make sure that we've got some good color contrasting so people know what the trail is and what it isn't. And then having that information available for folks to make decisions with. We are going to get into on Monday a lot more of the funding side of things. But I guess that's where I'll open it up now, and see if folks want to discuss any of these points.
Okay. Or if you're shy, you could always type your your question in the chat. So I'll monitor that for sure. But yeah, any questions, anyone?
And as well, like if you were hoping for information that wasn't included in the presentation, this is a great it's a great time to kind of chat some of that stuff out.
And also just want to acknowledge that there's that built environment accessibility standard, the new document that just came out from the province. It's very general, doesn't have the detailed guidance that the documents that were highlighted at the beginning of the presentation, but there is that. And of course there's a April 1st, 2026 is when that kicks into effect. And yes, the PDF of the presentation slides will have that available, as well as a recording of the webinar too. We'll be emailing that out to everyone who was registered, and we'll also include them on our website as PDFs to download with the recording. Any questions? Where to begin, hey?
I could jump in. This is
Sure.
Doug from Coxheath Hills. So thank you very much for that presentation. Chloe, and you said you're in Sydney River, so you might be familiar with our trail system in Coxheath.
Mhm.
Our trail system's on the top of a mountain or a
Yeah.
hill. Anyway, so there's and just the way our land ownership is, there's little chance we're ever going to be physically accessible. It's
Hmm.
steep slopes of over 20%. So I'm really kind of interested more of those other uh, measures or practices for making it more accessible, perhaps for people who are have physical mobility but have accessibility issues in other ways. So I'd love to hear other examples of those types of improvements.
Sure. And I have hiked Coxheath Mountain before, and I've fallen both times that I've done it. But I'll say right out of the gate, having that rope available is an accessibility feature that has helped me get up the front section of the mountain before. I've been eager to go up the back section. I've heard that that's more gravel and a bit easier to navigate. But I think that's one of those ways to incorporate greater accessibility. And I also I want to highlight too, as you've mentioned, that disability doesn't always limit challenging hikes. And certainly skill progression is something that anyone who's passionate about hiking wants to immerse themselves in. What I would say is that, you've got some good parking. You've got the information at the beginning of the trails to really, let the user know what they're about to experience. Perhaps some signage throughout the trails, so letting folks know maybe that they're 1 kilometer from the top. I know it gets tricky with things like edge protection because you don't want to impede too much on the natural environment. So when you get to the top of the mountain, you really, you don't want to necessarily see rails and bars. Sometimes that even looks like painted rocks, to let folks know that this is kind of the safe place to be before you might get too close to the edge or be at risk of injury. Does that kind of answer your question? I know that's not every example.
Yeah, no, those are some good suggestions. I mean, you'll be happy to hear that we're actually we've got some redevelopment plans, and part of it is redeveloping that main trail so it's a little bit less steep. So you won't
I
need
do
a rope.
enjoy it. I like the challenge.
Yeah, and we're trying to find the balance there. But it's a bad trail design just with water damage at the moment, as well as accessibility.
Yeah, maybe it's having some more of those ropes, right? Because that can help people kind of stabilize and rest a little bit before they kind of take their next step. Sometimes if it's appropriate, viewing platforms or having a bench at the top, which I think you do, those kinds of things.
Chloe, I wonder if I'm familiar with that trail too. I grew up in Howie Center, and then it was only years later, of course, that I discovered the trail, and I'm wondering, how realistic it would be, Doug, for more frequent benches, because there's lots of 85-year-olds who would probably want to take on that challenge, but they're probably just going to have to stop a bit more, and have a rest. And from that perspective, age, our chances of having some sort of disability, developing a disability, increases with age, and Nova Scotia is already at 30% of our population. And so I think from an age perspective, and then all the, various infirmities all of us get, including me, as we get older, like resting, and then, yeah, I think the resting piece is a big one. Do you think that's a realistic thing to be able to do on the trail, Doug and Nicole?
After Nicole had to leave, but absolutely, we do have several benches on our trails already. And certainly in redeveloping, we'll be looking to add. And so I take that point.
It could be something too, like a barrel of reusable hiking sticks
Yeah,
at the start of the trail.
yeah, I think that naturally happens already, apparently.
Yeah, yeah, I've seen a couple kind of leaning up against the sign. Yeah. That's something too, Doug. Like, I'm happy to look more into that too, and see some, what are different unique things happening like across the province and beyond for the more challenging hikes.
Yeah, yeah, I'm kind of interested because I know just our physical geography, we're always going to be a challenging physical hike in terms of, you do have to climb a mountain. But would love to incorporate where possible, anything that can help enhance it for people.
For sure. I'm just gonna write your name down.
Any other questions or comments?
Hi, Chloe, it's Charlene. Thank you. That was very informative for me, because typically I think when I think of accessibility, I think of strollers, wheelchairs, that kind of thing, and bringing in the other things around sensory and the cognitive stuff was perfect. Now we manage a rail trail, which is the grade is good, but our challenge is surface, because it's a multi-use trail, and a lot of it, like it's quite expensive to put on, pea gravel and crusher dust. So that's a big challenge. But I think one of the things I think about our trail too is it's along several lakes, and it would be nice to start. And I like the idea of that 500-meter loop that gives people that want to hike but don't want to hike a long linear trail, that maybe we could have a start and an end point on the rail trail and into a lake or something that could be made accessible. I really like that idea.
Yeah, and you could have it too that portion of the trail isn't a multi-use trail.
Yes.
And even if there's an area where they kind of overlap, you could kind of try to designate one, like extend the width of the trail and designate a lane.
Yeah, that would be great. And maybe have any of the vehicles have a slower speed there or whatever too.
Yeah. And I can't imagine the cost of like lining the trail with 2x4s and securing those. But it did seem like for that trail, it really did help with maintaining at least the gravel in one spot to be able to be maintained. Yeah.
And sometimes you can do it. I've been on trails where they just use the logs that they've cut from along the trail. And it does work somewhat.
Yeah, absolutely. Natalie or Melissa, did you have a question?
Hi, it's Melissa. Yeah, kind of. This is all very good information for me, and just hearing it from everybody else, it's also very good. We've like developed like 10 trails. I'm thinking really like a couple are along the dikes, and I'm thinking those ones may be the better ones to make them accessible, because they're already kind of flat, it's already kind of there, definitely need some work. I'll be interested in part 2 because that's where it talks about funding, and that's what we lack. But I guess I have a quick question in terms of one trail in particular, there's a railroad crossing. Any suggestions, recommendations for accessibility? Like a little, like I'm not sure how that would work, a ramp or if, yeah.
Yeah, so I assume the railway crossing isn't still being used as a railway?
No, it is.
Oh, it is. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, but the
So,
train only runs, I think, like, I don't know, at midnight and once throughout the day. So,
okay, yeah. So definitely like anything that you can do for tactile attention. So I know sometimes those steel plates aren't exactly like, especially if you're working with gravel, they're kind of tricky to install and they're a little expensive. But when you think of someone who may be using a cane, so the edge protection, if you've got the wood kind of along the trail, you can kind of layer it vertically so it creates that kind of tactile warning.
okay.
And having that, like you'd have to kind of embed it into the ground so it's not a tripping hazard. But then having potentially a sensory beeping or buzzing. I don't know that, it's certainly a balance of, you want to experience nature and peace and birds chirping and not like buzzers. But signage, absolutely. If there are tripping, like if the railway would be like above 13 millimeters, you'd want to bevel it somehow, whether that's through a ramp or adding things on each side of the train track that wouldn't make the train go off the track. But you could certainly add something like that that could help folks cross.
Yeah, because it's kind of like one thing that's making this trail not be a loop is this railroad crossing. We're kind of just like avoiding it, but if we could make it more accessible for others, then we could make a loop. So
yeah, so you could definitely add the ramp. You could also have information on the signage and through like a QR code that lets people know that like at 1 o'clock there is a train that runs through the loop.
oh yeah, that's a good idea.
So and like it may not be a predictable schedule, I'm not sure, but just the more information, the better. So signage, ramp, that would be kind of what I suggest for sure. There's probably not really a way around the rail, so going over it would be kind of the only option.
Yes, you can't go under it. You're gonna have to go over it.
Yeah.
Okay, no, that's good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
My question, Chloe, for you was around, you talked about the width of the trail. And so we have a few like wooden bridges on our trails. They're not very, very long, but I don't think that you can actually pass two people at once. So, I mean, in a wheelchair. So I'm talking about, but a walking, visually sighted, whatever, they can do that easily. But with two wheelchairs or people with strollers, it might be difficult. Would you suggest that we put some signage at both ends of the bridges?
Would you, how long do you think the bridge is?
I would say 40 feet.
Okay. Could someone with sight see someone coming on the other side of the bridge?
Yes.
Okay. I think signage would be helpful, just knowing that like this is a narrow bridge. I think the most important thing is that like a wheelchair can fit comfortably and maneuver, like they're not going to get stuck width-wise. Sometimes power chairs are larger. So if someone was in a power chair, they may just need that extra room. So having a sign that says, it's a narrow bridge or no turning room, no turning radius. I think that would be helpful. And then so like having that information at the bridge itself, but also at the beginning. So if it is a loop or if you have to go down and back, at the 50-meter mark, there is a bridge, a narrow bridge that is a single file, whatever.
Thank you. That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Like that idea.
Yeah. And again, like these are literally just ideas that are kind of popping into my head that may be ways to navigate. It's certainly not like the only way to do things. And there may be other ideas too that are great to incorporate. So happy to support and look some stuff up if folks have questions that come up outside of this webinar. Does anyone else? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to ask just generally to the group, how realistic do you think, even for maybe not to do a full-on accessible transition, but even to implement some of these ideas, do you feel it's a realistic thing to try for your trails?
I'll just say, for me personally, or it's going to come down to funding, I guess. We're a nonprofit, and so we have a very small budget. So we do have a couple that would be fantastic for this. Like I said, we have some dike trails that would be so easy to like just put some gravel and put some side rails up. But for us, it just kind of really comes down to the funding. But it's nice to be here and see it. Well, it makes me think, how can we partially at least make them accessible, maybe? So, yeah.
Thanks for that feedback, Melissa.
I have a quick comment on that last, or two things. I know you're going to do another seminar on funding, so that might answer Melissa's question and or concerns on funding there too. But I also through the province, they were doing a couple of webinars as well through trail groups recently, and just giving a bit of an overview of what provincial funding is available. And I think those recordings are available if you reach out to the trails cohort through CCTH with the Nova Scotia government. So that might be worth doing for because a lot of the funding just opened up April 1st. In my role, for example, so there's like trails will fall under my purview. So we'll really be working with different community trail groups. So it will really depend on their trails, because it's going to be anything from snowmobile trails to hiking trails, foot trails, very mountainside trails. That we might use Coxheath for I have used Coxheath for a warm-up trail on. So some of them, won't be able to ever be fully accessible. But I think that there is also a lot of opportunity to incorporate some accessibility features into some of the trail. And then there's also just some plans for helping to make some connector paths for the multi-use trails where that idea of that first loop of the trail could be accessible. And I think there are ways to be able to do that so that at least a portion of the a multi-use trail might be able to be a bit more of an accessible, or at least, like I say, to be able to highlight the accessibility features. I think part of what I'll be doing is a bit of an inventory with that lens to see like to do a bit of an assessment as to where things stand right now for the groups that are looking for support through the Trails program. And also like exploring what trails would be a bit more public trails that exist right now. I also apologize for my dog chewing on his if it's noisy here in my microphone. He's not on a cheeky roll there. So yeah, I think that this is really, really helpful information and might be able to kind of identify which trails could be fully accessible with a few improvements, and what ways we might be able to just enhance the accessibility features a bit more for some of the trails. And then as future planning goes, just to make sure that that's incorporated. I think that it would be a good idea to encourage that for trail groups to consider that as a lens. Like if we're going to support them, then have they considered this? And is this something that we could kind of have a walkthrough with the support so that right from the get-go, if people are seeking funding from us or the province or looking to develop their trail, are they factoring in accessibility features from the get-go so that way it's not an afterthought and then you're backtrack looking for funding.
Absolutely, Yvette. I couldn't agree more. I think you really hit an important part of this right now, and it was certainly my experience after having taken the Rick Hansen Foundation program that I don't see the world the same anymore. There was certainly more information provided at the first kind of accessibility introduction, but looking at things, I'm sure I'm still sharing my screen, but looking at things like ramps, and I didn't think that we could build a ramp here, and things like how simple signage is to laminate a piece of paper and nail it to a tree, and then have someone be actually able to navigate better in the environment. I'll stop sharing now just because we're kind of in the dialogue part of it, but you all have this knowledge now. So I think especially when folks are coming to you for support, it's much easier to build a trail or to start with the lens of accessibility than to go in after and make adjustments in terms of things like the trail width and those kinds of things that are more involved. But yeah, it's great. I think the more people who have information and consider accessibility, we are going to get there with improved access for trails. So
can I ask one more question? Sorry.
We've got it till 8 o'clock. So
okay. How did you do the Rick Hansen Foundation training? Like I'm just wondering if somebody was interested in taking that. What did you do?
So when I was on mat leave, I started dabbling a little bit in interior design, and then realized that I couldn't get into buildings with my stroller. So found the Rick Hansen course, and they do have a bit of entrance criteria in that you do have to be able to read blueprints. There's two kind of streams that you can use the Rick Hansen certification in. So you can kind of go into built environments and assess them, or you can assess them from blueprints and actually make recommendations before it goes to build. You can do whatever you want with your certification. You don't have to do that, but it is a prerequisite to go in. I will say I bought a $50 blueprint reading course somewhere in the States and did it online, and they accepted that. And they do advertise that it's for architects and engineers, but I'm certainly neither of those things. They also advertise that it's for people with lived experience. So in my experience, it was an exceptional course. It was worth every penny. At the time, the provincial government provided a subsidy for anyone in the province who wanted to take it. So I think at the time it was around $800. But it took you through everything. It really opened my eyes to how the littlest thing can be a barrier for someone to getting into the environment. And they provided so much insight for different disabilities and things to consider, because so often we do just think accessibility and it's a wheelchair. And it was, yeah, I don't know if I'm kind of rambling. I don't know if that answers your question, but
No, I like your rambling. That's good.
yeah, yeah, I'd recommend the course to anyone who is in a position to take it for sure. They've got some admission criteria, but it's nothing that you can't, don't look at the engineer and architect, because it's very user friendly. It's a great course.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. Thank you.
Yeah.
Chloe, so how was the subsidy that you got 800, or was the cost of the course 800?
I think the cost of the course was around 1,800, and they cut it in half.
Okay, great. Oh, okay, interesting.
Yeah.
And do you know if that subsidy is still around, or?
I'm not sure. I know it still is offered through Nova Scotia Community College. They have virtual and in-person offerings. There's an online college that also offers it, as well as I can't quite remember the other college that offers it. It is all listed online where you can get the course from.
Okay.
Yeah.
And also, so if folks, if they aren't up for taking the training and doing it themselves, there are, as you said before, people in the province who are trained. So folks can just go to the Ricanson website, and there's a section where you can search for qualified trained people that are in the province, right? Because I think I've seen, I think from our first webinar, I'll grab some of those links and I'll add those to the follow-up email for this. But there is a link somewhere there where you can find people, right?
Yes. A lot of the folks that were in my cohort were like facility managers through recreation departments or, municipalities. Some were builders, folks who work for contracting companies who are kind of looking to add this lens or service to their existing services that they provide. I was actually one of two rec therapists that took the course. The other works for Halifax Recreation, HRM.
Yeah. Yeah. So there are a fair number of people out there. So if you're looking for someone, then they are around. Any other questions? Okay, I will come on. So thank you so much, Chloe. That is such valuable information. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and experience with everyone. I'm sure when people go away and digest, they're like, "Oh, I should have asked her this." But we'll send your contact info to folks too. But there is the webinar next week that will focus. It's not just on funding though. It's on funding and oh goodness, more creative kind of like out of the box kind of thinking around things, and probably focusing a little bit on some of the more affordable things you could do, recognizing how funding is hard to get these days. So that is coming up. And what we will do is, again, we'll have the recording available on the website soon. We'll send you that link in a follow-up email along with the resources we've talked about, some of the links we talked about, and a PDF of the slides, as well as that checklist. I think that'll be really useful for folks. So we will follow up. Yeah, thanks again, Chloe. This is great. I'm so happy that there's so many people who are interested in looking at accessibility and trails, because we certainly need more of that, especially in this province where we have the highest rate of disability in the country, I do believe is yeah, we need it here, and it's great that you're all thinking this way. So thanks again, everyone. Oh, a feedback survey will be in the follow-up email as well. So if you want to give some feedback on the webinar, and then check out the other webinars that are coming up as well. So yeah, have a lovely evening, everyone, and happy trails.
Thank you.